Well, let's go back several years. We really had a heart to see the restoration of the role of Israel as a people of worship and the calling that they've had. I mean, essentially everything that you know about worshiping the one true God came from Israel. And today we still sing songs from the Psalms, songs that were written thousands of years ago. So how much more if we have modern day Levites and psalmists? Is there a spiritual heritage and wealth that we want to share with the nation? So there are practical applications to that, because if you know musicians, they are interesting creatures of emotional depth, we'll say. And so essentially what we wanted to form was a community for creatives and for musicians and songwriters. And we start very young, the Fellowship of Artists. Start very young in training with their instruments. A lot of them will compete. We have the Music Making for Kids program. They'll compete every year to win the scholarship for the following year. And we have about 60 of them across the country. Then we have a recording studio in Jerusalem, and so we get them to a place where they are good enough that we're going to record their music. They're songwriters, and of course, the entire time we want to know that they are doing well emotionally and spiritually. So it's kind of very holistic approach to what we're doing. So this spring, we recorded live in a space which, if you've been to Israel and you see this, you're going to kind of wonder where we recorded this, because there's so much green, because in the spring, Israel is very, very green and beautiful. These are the hills surrounding Jerusalem. And we got some of the best songs that a bunch of them were recorded during the lockdowns, because you couldn't be, with a lot of people, but you could be in the studio one or two at a time, and we just recorded several albums during that time. So we called it the First Fruits, because it was essentially our first album collectively from the different artists that we've been working with. They're all written in Hebrew and Arabic. If you notice, a lot of times we shy away from political stuff and, usually the kind of go-to thing when you hear about Israel, because we believe that we are there to be a light in Israel, to see the restoration of Israel spiritually to the Lord. And while we vote and we pray for our leaders and we take our government seriously and our military, they are not the source of our salvation. And so we don't focus on that. Amen. So having said that, though, because there has been so much recently, and we did have a lot of people asking us, what about the government, and what about this recent uprising, what do we call it, military operation? It is, I've just had a lot of people really concerned, and I had people writing me on Facebook, and what's going to happen? It was right before Shavuot, and it is when we bring our first fruits. But right before, just a few days before, and we had, our deadlines, and we were going to get the concert out and everything, this little mini war. We don't call them wars, because then we would have a war every 6 months. So we call them military operations until they get so bad that we call it a war, and then it's officially a war. But we were at the studio, and there had been some riots in Jerusalem, and you could hear them kind of in the background. Hamas was threatening, pull out your police from the Temple Mount, something stupid like that. So obviously Israel said no, and so Hamas fired on Jerusalem, where we live. Now, most Arab nations know not to fire on Jerusalem. Every once in a while, somebody forgets that it's not a good idea, and then they do that. But for the most part, they know Jerusalem's kind of an off-limits area. So I was pulling in. They said, 6 o'clock, we're going to fire on you if you don't do this or that. And so I was driving home from the studio, pulled into our driveway, and the siren goes off. And I was just thinking, I got to find all the kids and make sure we get in the stairwell. And so I actually left the car running, because I was concerned about getting in there, because we have about 90 seconds from the time a siren goes off to the time that a rocket or a missile can land. And so I just had, we have 5 kids, and I knew we'd have to find them wherever they were in the house. So I ran inside, and we are standing in the stairwell, because we don't have a bomb shelter, but the stairwell works pretty well. And the kids started arguing about where in the stairwell we should be sitting. And then at one point they're arguing, and one of them goes, "Guys, we could die in a few minutes. Let's not let this argument be the last thing we do to each other." So our kids are very well grounded in reality. In any case, so then in the distance, you could kind of hear this like boom, 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 boom. And we're like, oh, that one was really close. So I don't know if we got a picture of it, but just a few hundred yards from our house, we did have one land. We're in the middle of our projects, and one of our staff members who's in the reserves in the Air Force gets called up. And so we got deadlines, and I'm calling up our guy, like, where's the files? And he's like, sorry, I'm here with, mounting weapons and stuff on the planes that are about to be flown. So that's the reality of life there. It's very, you never know what's going to happen. And as soon as it's over, we all go back to normal. And it's one of the reasons Israelis don't like war, because most of the people fighting in them are just civilians who have to drop everything and go fight. And so the sooner it's over, the happier they are to go home to their families. But it definitely changes the perspective of people when you realize, like, Israel doesn't ever want to have to go into these situations. They like living their lives, but it doesn't always work out that way. They do have to drop everything at some point and go defend their families. I've been in these rounds since I was a kid. I was 3 when my dad went and fought in the Lebanese War. I was in the Gulf War. We had rockets flying over our house. It's normal for me. It's, kind of like you guys have tornado sirens here, right? Is that, yeah? Okay, so that's how we don't have tornadoes, we have rockets. So it's not something that's unusual or scary. It's just part of, okay, this is what's happening right now. It usually happens in the summer. So a lot of people don't have air conditioning in Israel and the Middle East, and they get very cranky. And so they're like, let's go do something. And yes, that's what they end up doing, firing rockets on us and protesting in the streets. So this particular round was different because usually everyone's used to the rockets firing. It doesn't mean that it's okay. Civilians that live closer to Gaza have 15 seconds to get into their bomb shelter. Okay, that's 15 seconds with kids and grandparents and sick people. So 15 seconds is not a lot of time, and it's definitely not okay that it's happening, but it is something that we have become accustomed to as part of our life. This particular round, we had masses of Muslims protesting in the streets of our major cities. And this is where this shifted, because you had Jews in their homes locking their doors in the only country where Jews are supposed to feel safe. And so the air was just very thick and full of rage, and it was definitely a difficult time. So it is something worth praying into, because Israeli Jews really like the idea of Israeli Arabs living among them. Whatever the news is saying, we consider it really cool. Like, they make awesome food, they have great culture, they're very hospitable, they have a lot more class than we do in terms of being nice.